Okay, now we're entering part three. And if you haven't seen part one or two, I behoove you to go to the very end of this one. This should be the last one. And go in your top left hand corner and click it. It'll take you back. You can see it'll say part one on it. And anyhow, also along with that, I keep threatening to tell you a story. So those that have stuck with it this long will end up getting a story here in just a minute. But I know a lot of this has been about horses, and indeed, that was the thing that I was so enamored on when I was a kid, and I still am, the majesticness of a horse. And after finding out growing up what all it brought to humanity and took us to another level, it just really hit home. And then you found out that, cars are like our modern carriages with horses and chariots, if you will. And then they still work off this idea of horsepower and things like that, and that it's still held, and the horse is still in high regard, but horse racing is really kind of looked at as frowned upon, and the horse isn't used in any way, shape, or form as much as it used to be used not too long ago. For the world took a drastic change here, the Industrial Revolution, and ended up developing cars and things like that, that these cultures that used to do horses ended up making. There's different traditions here, and we're going to look through those at the last of it, and like accoutrements and things that they have with them. In the 18th century, the residents of Spanish Texas began to herd cattle on horseback and sell in Louisiana, both legally and illegally. Whoops. Their horses were called genet type, which became the Spanish Mustang, and they're a simple riding horse, light riding horse, if you will. In fact, if you look at this, you can tell from a carving this is someplace from European standards, and talking about, and they're well compact, well muscled build, good disposition, and so on, but they're a light riding horse, not necessarily a war horse or anything along like that, but we'll talk about the difference here in a minute. That became that Spanish Mustang, the wild horses that we know about. By the early 19th century, the Spanish crown and later independent Mexico offered impresario grants in what would be Texas to non-citizens, such as settlers from the United States. And later, in 1821, Stephen F. Austin led a group which became the first English-speaking Mexican citizens of what would be the Americas, or Texas. Following Texas's independence in 1836, more Americans immigrated into the impresario ranching areas of Texas, of course following the Alamo and so on. Here the settlers were strongly influenced by the Mexican vaquero culture, borrowing vocabulary and attire from their counterparts, but also retaining some of the livestock handling traditions and culture of the eastern United States and Great Britain that had a heritage coming long before. The Texas cowboy was typically a bachelor type who was hired on with different outfits from season to season. Indeed, this is another instance where we can use the concept of jack, and not a Union Jack, but Jack of all trades. For the other half of that statement is Jack of all trades, master of none, but surely they were pretty damn good at a few things and knew a whole lot about some. They were very useful. Following the American Civil War, vaquero culture became combined with the cattle herding and drover traditions of the southeastern United States that evolved as settlers moved west. Additional influences developed out of Texas as cattle trails were created to meet up with the railroad lines of Kansas and Nebraska and all the cattle trails that we talked about, in addition to expanding ranching opportunities in the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains front east of the Continental Divide. The new settlers required more horses and to be trained faster, and brought a bigger and heavier horse with them than the genet type. This led to modifications in the bridling and bitting traditions used by the vaqueros, and so they started using the elder traditions from here. Thus, the Texas cowboy tradition arose from a combination, though, of cultural influences that, in addition to the need for adaptation to the geography and climate of West Texas, and the need to conduct long cattle drives to get animals to the market. Historian Terry Jordan proposed in 1982 that some Texas traditions that developed particularly after the Civil War may trace to colonial South Carolina, as most settlers in Texas were of the southern United States, like their origins. However, these theories have been called into question by some reviewers. Well, yeah, we know a lot of people came from Mississippi and this, that, and the other, and all into Texas. When you talk about the people that came to help for the Alamo, you can see that trait of those people too. So, in a subsequent work, Jordan also noted that the influence of post-war Texas upon the whole of the frontier Western cowboy tradition was likely much less than previously thought. I don't know why I have that thrown in here in the first place, but I would say that you wouldn't want to minimize Texas in any way, and the amount of impact that the gold rush had, but truly the Alamo had a large foundational point and something that was, well, foundational in the way that we have things today. And so I wouldn't say that I would minimize it in any way. In fact, it was, in a way, the southern form of gateway leading to the Wild West. Originally, it was the Wild West. But then there was west that was further than that and further than that. And that didn't really get taken on hard by other than frontier man and so on, and sparse people that were coming over in Conestoga wagons until the gold rush, and then there became runs and runs and rows of them. Now they left little wagon ruts that are there, but you can see these wagon ruts all over Europe and into Proto-European lands that are cutting through stone. And people have looked at them closely and said, well, no, they didn't carve that all like that. This is like wear over time, and then that happened a long time ago because it's had erosion from that in patina. And so how long had these carts been going over, and how long, basically, how many times had a cart passed over this point? And it shows you a huge industrial park going on there. A lot of people, wonder if that had horses to do with it, because the middle doesn't have a worn out spot. Sometimes the horses didn't ride the middle. There was two of them, one on the far right, one on the far left, out at an angle point. Other times I'm sure there were people that were pulling things too. Oxen and donkeys and so on. But the horse, well, it's a horse of a different color, isn't it? So following the Civil War, the vaquero culture combined with the cattle herding culture that was going on there. And this guy says, well, it's probably much less than previously thought. I wouldn't say that it's less. Hey, to entice you to go through my story here, I'm going to tell you that after the story, we're going to talk about the Florida cow hunter or the cracker cowboy. Yep, there were crackers. Let's take a look at them in pictures, and then I'll go off into this story here. So that's Florida and cowboy, and you can tell it's like a Florida brush area, a little bit of swampy looking area, some palm trees there, and so on. These are ones in Hawaii, and vaqueros, and yep, cattle got brought to them. The whole idea that, the horses too, they have a tradition, definitely there. Here's somebody lassoing in old days, an old picture. You don't think it goes around everywhere, but here's Calgary. Yeah, but that rodeo could be anywhere, but it clearly says Calgary right there beside the horse. This is a bucking bronco type thing where you're supposed to try to hold on. If y'all ever watched it, it's just like 8 seconds a nightmare, isn't it? Like riding bulls. Old vaqueros and stuff, but wait, this is back over in the Spaniard Andalusian lands that are showing here, by the way. And modern cattle trails too can happen, and they still run cattle to this day. People still have this ideology. In fact, they run them from one area to another, and so on. And I guess that's a good part to start. So many of you know that I lived and worked on a ranch there for a period of time, a couple of years, and whenever I first started to work there, I got in with normal working and stuff, and having to deal with the cattle and all these things that we were doing. One of the first things that we did, though, and I thought it might happen all the time, was take and run all the cattle up into an area, and then we had to get them separated, like you see here, where the reds and the blacks, and we had to separate different cattle, and we're going to put ones in different spots. And they only got put together because they were fixing to do this, because they were already separated before, but then they had put them together, do all this, and then they ran them through a whole medicine thing, and they had to do boluses and stuff, and all this medicine and squirt stuff down their throat and up their butt. Then you put this spray on their body and stuff like that. And it was just all preventative type stuff, because a couple had been found recently in other cattle near there that said things, and we showed one that had a sign of it. We called a veterinarian, and after this they called it a big stupid ploy, but I think what we did was we did preventative measures that worked out good for us in our favor. But yeah, regardless of that, that type of activity didn't happen as much, but it did sometimes. Well, after working there for a while, I ended up being always going with these people that I didn't have to go buck the hay and do things like that a lot of the other people were doing that were having to do it, although I did my fair share of that. I started being asked to go on the tractor with people that were doing other things, and it's like, what would I be used for? And I'm like, well, I can put the tractor pin in whenever we get back up to the equipment and stuff like that, but without you having to stop and get off and, oh, it's just a hair off and all that kind of crap. But what else? Oh, well, oh, you're actually training me to drive the tractor and do these things. And we're using big old equipment with PTO shaft stuff on the back, which is a spinning effect, all kinds of things going on. Big mold boards, which like dig up the ground and flop up chunks of it everywhere. Discs, which have just metal discs all over it, look like cymbals somewhat, all over the thing, and they run over it and crumble it down into little pieces. Harrows and things like that. I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about, but huge tractors, and we're doing this stuff. And I never driven a tractor before, but he was training me how to do it. I don't know if you know, but there are two brakes on a tractor, one that brakes the left side, one brakes the right. Really, it's the rear tires that are making things happen, of course. And so whenever you turn real quickly, you want to turn, but also press on that left brake, not both of them, and it helps you to turn and so on. In fact, you can actually drive this thing as if it starts to veer a little bit by just slightly pressing one of these brakes and getting it back in order. Anyhow, I got to doing that for a while. I built up a point, and I was officially a hand on the ranch and so on, and not a tenderfoot or a greenhorn type person anymore that didn't know what the hell he was doing. And they had me doing all these fields and things like that and stuff. And next thing I know, like, instead of somebody else, they were choosing me to do things and stuff. And I thought, okay, great, I'm going with it. And I started dealing with the horses a whole lot, and every weekend we got to mess with the horses. I've always been well enamored with them. I let them know a little bit about that and everything. And for a short period of time, I ended up becoming a wrangler at this ranch. So I ended up actually being over the people that ended up doing the horses. Well, we only had like 26 horses and then 3 Arabians and da da da. But anyhow, so it was really a cattle ranch that also was a lot about the farming that was going on there too. So a conglomerative. Anyhow, so I actually got to take care of 2 horses. They gave them to me and stuff like that. And whenever we had to do things that involved the horses, I would be in that crew that was making it happen and usually setting up things. And we're doing this, and we're going to go down to here and do that. Da, da, da. And so it'd go in the truck all the way to the place that the horse barn, and then load all up, do your things, and then have to ride the horses all the way back to do stuff. Anyhow, long story longer, that's just a setup, kind of, pretty much. So we've got a foreign dignitary, well, he's not really foreign, named Governor Bill Daniels, and he's a rich man. He has to do with these cattle that we're all dealing with here too, and big number of money, things like, in that day, $20 million, and I was just like, what? Yeah, now these cattle are extremely important to third world countries as far as feeding them and so on, as well as America itself and stuff, and Brangus and Angus beef that we're eating nowadays and so on. But so he comes to visit, but it's raining, and we have the whole meeting with him. I don't want to go into it. I could go in a 30-minute deal about that, but anyhow, it starts raining real bad, and while we're in the middle of this meeting thing, one of the guys that works there that wasn't in the little thing ended up coming in. He's soaking wet, and you could tell something's wrong. In fact, the mood of the whole room changed real quick and got silent. And he just says out 64 went through into C7 and da da da, which would mean nothing to anybody. They'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? But we all damn well knew what that meant, because 64 was a bull that was down in the front area. And what we had done is, like these people moving it right here, we had moved the cattle from one area, way over on the left side over here, a couple down, and consolidated and put them right over on the road. So when this guy came in and he got to go take the little tour thing and drive around, they're right there. You know, like Lion Country Safari, when you go, where the hell are the lions at? Well, we had them right there. But lo and behold, they had broke through that, and the fence not attached to the road, which would have worked out real good, but the other way. Well, this was in an area that's like this and solid, and it becomes the bottoms. And they call it the bottoms because it's the lower land. And it started to flood, and you could see water standing already in places out there and stuff. And so that was bad. But as soon as he came in and he said this, that it happened, we knew it was on, and we had to do something about it. And this whole meeting kind of was over right now. And we'll see in a little bit or something. So we got up and started to do things. I looked over at Mr. Appleby, and he just gave me a nod. That's it. And we went out of there. Before I did so, I picked these guys that were part of the horse crew that we ran with, and people that knew what the hell they were doing, and got in our truck too, along with two other guys. Went out and they got in four-wheel drive trucks, one in a Bronco setup, and I'll tell you about in a minute. Then, so we went out there, got in the truck, and we turned around and hauled ass the other way. The bottoms would be, in your mentality, I guess, to the left. We went to the right. What's that way? It's a horse barn. And the guys who were with me were like, what the hell are you doing? Well, there's three up front and about 5 people in the back. And we're getting rained on, but it doesn't matter. And really doesn't matter. We were used to working in all kinds of stuff. When you're a cowboy, you don't whine and aren't going to melt. Anyhow, we went and got the horses because we knew the area that they were in, and the problem was going to be facing them with it already starting to get sogged up. It's going to be real tough to get anything done with the trucks, and you aren't going to have kids trying to slog around in there and have a bull go run them over or anything. I mean, just what the hell are you talking about? So I'm already gone the other way. Meanwhile, where we're getting them probably takes about 20 minutes for to get there and then come all the way down the road and back, which is only about a quarter mile, maybe a half at most with the turn and maybe a half. But we were back in about 20 minutes. Well, inside that time, one of the trucks that had left to go there headed off towards in the bottoms area, which the problem was there was not just these cattle, but there were others that were put in the same situation, which is a great setup for looks, but whenever it all started to flood in was bad. In fact, 2 sections of acreage or plots down, still way on our property, there's a creek that runs through there. And it's prone to flooding, and everything past that point, if it ever floods, is under, and it tries to come this way too, but it starts to go up where everything's at, where I was talking about and we all were, and so it's really not a problem. And in fact, it gets a little higher there, and then it goes up to a park and even a higher area and a huge area up there in the orchards and everything. But one of them had already gotten stuck, which we had to get out late with a tractor. But we're past that point, and we didn't turn into there. We went directly towards the problem. They were going towards other things. When we come back by that place, Governor Bill Daniels and the staff was standing out up under the awning of the place where we were having the meeting at, and just took off his hat and went whoo and looked at me, and a couple of the staff guys, you could tell, were making eye contact with me, and as we were going by. We'd already talked it out whenever we in the truck, and then when we got there and we're trying to saddle up, I'm telling everybody what the hell's going on, and you're not going to run these things into deep mud, and you're run them around and do stuff crazy shit like that. You break one of these in front. We don't want to do that in front of him. We want to look like heroes here, but we don't want to do something stupid. Anyhow, long story longer, we come riding all by this and going on through to Cheers, and we go down through where we got to go to, turn off into the first field and go all the way through the first field that's there, and here we go. And where did he break into? Well, he broke into that, through that fence, just walked through it. Barbed wire fence, everything, walked right through it. And it's a big bull. It's huge. But let me tell you, he's one that you don't mess with and don't get close to. But there are other ones out there, like 67, different one. You can actually go up and pet and rub his head and climb up on him and lay on his back. One of the guys that worked there that was attached to him somewhat, always dealing with him and everything, actually suntanned on his back one time, let him out of the pen. He went into the normal road where it goes and walked right in through where everybody was at, laying out, suntanning on his back, slowly walking right. Just, what the hell are you doing? Tanning? Why? What are you doing? I'm walking him. Anyhow, so sign, and this thing was huge, but it was just, it had been bottle fed, okay, and raised up. And it wasn't going to be one that we were going to ever do anything. In fact, he was a sire now, so he's living the life of Riley, if you will. So we're all hooked up like this, but we ain't wearing chaps or nothing like that. In fact, we were kind of dressed up kind of nice. So we didn't have this going on. I don't think anybody, well, Ken had a cowboy hat on, and that might be the only one. Well, JR had a hat on too. Yeah, okay, so that's it. Kenny might have been wearing a baseball cap. I don't think so. Um, and so we come through that field, and the thing is, all of the cows followed the sire, of course, into this other field area, and they've already busted through that, and they're into that other field. And in that other field, there's the bronco, and it's laying on its side. Oh no, well, everybody's out of it and everything, and we come up and we come to find out that they tried to hem him off a little bit here in their four-wheel drive, and when it did so, he wasn't having it, and after a couple of jaunts at it, he turned around and hit the bronco on its side and just literally flipped it right up on its side in the mud. Everybody had to climb out. One of the kids climbed out with an axe handle that was there in the back of it and tried to hit him in the nose and stuff off of it. It did nothing but chase him around for a minute. And then what happened? And then he went right through there, and he points, and the fence is just busted all through, and there's, of course, all the other cows. And I had seen them already, but it was like, you're at least not going to tell me anybody got hurt. Well, I'm already looking. Nobody's really hurt. So I tell everybody dismount for a second and try to push this thing back over. And we push it back over in the mud. They get back going. But regardless, we head on. And so now we've got to head off these guys. Now this field that we're in is probably about 250 yards wide by about 400 yards long. I play golf. That's about par 4. That's about right, 400 yards. And the depth of this field, though, the problem is it reaches that creek that ran from way over there I was talking about to the back of all this. So hopefully you're getting a good visual. Anyhow, in the back of this is thickets and trees, so we don't have that area to be able to cultivate, and it pinches off in an area and gets skinnier in there, and all this stuff on the trees is left. And behind that, just probably 30 yards, 40 yards maybe at places, is this creek that's pretty deep in there. And we've lost cattle due to getting lost and broke through and then somehow falling in that river and getting caught and all the thicket crap that's in it and everything else. Well, we've had to walk the fences before, and when we do, we usually use a truck. But if we can't use a truck, we do it on horseback. And then there are parts where you get to that and you got to get off the horse and look through the rest of it and make sure it's all there, because apparently one before, where this is all in here, the fence before the creek got busted through and ended up in there. Well, you couldn't stop 64 if you had to, not even with a bronco. These horses are fantastic. Some of them are real smart. I had this horse that they always thought was stupid. It was kind of a joke they made, because he used to put his mouth up on fence posts and then burp after he chewed his food. So I don't know why they thought that made him stupid, but he was an Appaloosa horse. So he had that blanket on his butt and little white spots, if you know what I'm talking about, and a blaze that looked about like this on his forehead, maybe a little bit stronger white little smear on it that you call a star or a blaze if it gets bigger, and so on. And we get off in that field, and there's 150 head of cattle in here, and there's Big Guy. And we see Big Guy, and he's just lumbering off through there. And more over here to the right, which is good, because right up against the fence is also where we haven't mow-boarded recently and disked the property, because in a couple of weeks we're fixing to plant. Yeah, great timing here with the flood thingy coming on. And so everything's mud. That's the reason I was telling everybody you ain't going to screw up these horses. In fact, when we were first started out, they started running them, and I had a guy, I couldn't whistle real loud. I had a guy next to me. I said, whistle at them to stop them. They got them to slow down, where they slowed down to a 2 until we caught up to them. And I said, hey, man, don't wear these horses out before we even get there. This is going to be hard on them. And we've got to finish this. And so let's be a little patient, and let's da-da-da, you know, and everything, you know. Anyhow, so when we get across that field there, we're coming across, and I'm running down that side, and he's probably maybe 5, 10 yards into the field and 50 yards ahead of me. He's got about 50 yards more, and he's going to be at the next fence, and there's an opening for the fence right there that goes into that next property. There's one on our right I sure as hell wish he'd go into, because it doesn't have any mud or anything onto it. There's a little pond in it, and if I get him through the other side of that, that's a road, and now he's walking down a road that's fenced on both sides, and we can corral him and make him go anywhere we want to. So thinking that real quick, I would give Buttons and yeah, like that, and I get him going, and I run him down that side and get him to pass the bull. And what I do, I stop and I turn around, and with Buttons I give an idea like, "Ye shall not pass." Now I didn't have him; he's not in a war horse or anything like that, and this is a huge bull, so it's really not something that should be messed with. But I tried to train him to rear up, because a couple of guys out there had their horses where they rear up, but he wouldn't rear up fully. He'd rear up halfway and tucks his paws like he would, and then he'd come down and stomp. That's it. Well, that was pretty cool, though, especially in this moment. And I had another thing where I could get him to do it, and I would, yeah, like that, and he would try to run off. And I thought, okay, well, I can use this a little bit, and I've used him to cut cattle. By this point, I understand him. We have an understanding. I bonded with a horse pretty well. So, long story even longer, I get around him and over towards that fence, and I turn back at him and I go, "Not this way, buddy. Let's go another." And he's going to try to corral around me and the horse, and I tell him cut, and I give him the neck rein, and he instantly goes into that mode, and his ears turn back at me, and he goes, "What?" And he starts to cut this damn thing. So he jumps and stammers at him and stuff, and the bull is like, "I ain't gonna have it." So I rear him up, and he stomps at him like that, and it stops him. And I say, "Cut" again, and he takes and goes at him sideways and basically tries to act like he's gonna run into him, and stops and goes, fronts at him. And I back him up a hair like that, and he turns and looks, and he's like, "Which way am I gonna go?" Then he says, "I'm just gonna go right around you anyhow." And here I cut, and here we go, and here we go, here we go, and we go back and forth a couple of times, and he's holding this thing off like a champ. It's amazing. So I get him to stomp again. Whenever I do, he turns again, and I get the horse to run forward, and he literally runs his chest into his ass, and he starts running, and he runs straight forward, which is towards that fence that I wish he would have gone through, and he smacks right through that fence and up into the area that has the pond. And now all I got to do is get everybody on their horses to go back around this whole thing and into where you can go into this property, because you can't go through right here. He broke all the things through, but we ain't going to walk the horses through it. I thought about getting off mine and trying to just, but there's barbed wire coiled up everywhere. It's not something you do around a horse. In fact, they don't need to be around this right now. Be careful. Regardless, we had to go around and off into it. We go off around into it. Now he's the king of his little castle, but we're not all mudded out. And now we can move and do things like that. And we take the guys up and we just corral him around, get him to a fence. I tell a guy to go take and open up the fence, and we take him all the way to that edge of the fence where the opening is that he just opened, and run him out there. And now we got him on ground that all the trucks go on all the time, and on a street. There we go. I've got him on a lane kind of situation, and it's sandy gravel on top of it now, no longer mud topped and everything, and we can make him go anywhere we want to do. Well, out of convenience, I have him just corral him through the machine yard that we have there and around out there, rather than go anywhere near these people, and corral him through there and out the other side of it. I have people run off in front of him. I go up too. We open up a fence, and then we all get there in a line. The other guys push, and he runs right into this other area, and we close it, and we go, "You're fine right there." Now we have to go back and get 150 cattle and try to get him to go through this same thing, and we're going to put him in that same spot. It was quite an endeavor, and let me tell you, Buttons was the king of cutting that day. It wasn't going to have it. After he had put off that bull, it was damn near his size. He was like this guy, looking at him like, no. It took us a little while, but we got it back in there. And, here's a famous iconography, the saddle. See those tassels are on the saddle? People wonder why they always got tassels on there. Well, you can pop that off real quick. That's the same kind of tassel you'd use if you're hog tying one. Yeah, like we looked at the very first. Hell, we'll go back to pictures of it, but go back to the very first where they showed these guys He's got fringes and tassels all over him too, but people say that's for show, but it didn't used to be for show. Because when they used to hog tie, they head and heel them. Then you got to go around and wrap them real quick. Something like that right there is real convenient. So when you wonder why Daniel Boone had all that going on and stuff. Wild West shows. Told you I used to go to one things like that, but let's go back up here. So to finish off our story, long story even longer, it was real hard to get those cows out of that thicket because by the time we had gotten back, more than half of them were in the thicket. And we got half of them to run and go where we wanted to go, but then the other half were all caught up in the trees and all that thicket. We had to run those horses around through that. And we weren't going to lasso them and drag them out of there or do anything. We basically had to run them, so there was none of this going on. There's a woman in a Wild West show rearing up like I was talking about. So mine wouldn't get up that high. No. The other guys had them where to do too. Mine would do something almost like this, or you just stomp. He'd pull up, but he'd stomp. I worked real good for that moment. Yeah. There's Dale. Old Cowboys. What are they looking at? Oh, it says they're shooting craps. I thought they were looking at a map. Here's old cattle rustling days, things like that. Here's wolves trying to get at a cow, apparently a stray. That's the fear of some things like this. You have these big mounted cattle, but bad things can happen, man. So you had to shepherd over the top of them. When we got back, oh, we were muddy as hell. Those horses got a Thanksgiving dinner as far as a horse goes, but with extra oats and trittercade and so on. But Governor Bill wanted to hear from me. He called me out by name. If they tried to act like I was some kind of hero and stuff and everything, and I go, "No, we all did this and everything." And he go, "I heard what your horse did," and I go, "That horse is a hero then too." I heard from the guys that worked there that he was going to try to offer me a job, but they told him not to try it. Oh, whatever. Shortly after that, which I was starting to take at this time, I was taking different welding courses. They were there. Yeah, that's another thing I got into a little bit because we were welding a lot of farm things back and everything, and I learned how to do it. But they were like, "Hey, we'll tell you what, we'll pay for it and everything." And I went, "Okay," so I did that. But then a subsidiary course, secondary, superlative course, I started learning arc and heli-arc welding. And then the next step of that was that they were trying to get me to do was submerged. And of course, I was already dive certified. So next thing I could be working on oil rigs and things like that. But I didn't really want to go into it I really didn't. Anyhow, so yeah, that's just one thing that can happen, and different things. That was probably a big major one that happened there, and it was a right now kind of thing because literally by the time the sun went down, 30 minutes after we got those in, you couldn't hardly see out in there. It was so dark. We were assured we had gotten all the cattle, but it was so dark. What you could tell though is the whole area was flooded. In fact, you could see the secondary fence back there still in water, and there was water going in the whole area, and it was all, oh, it's kind of like that Sumerian flood, but it wasn't 15 foot deep. It was about 2. Anyhow, Florida cracker cowboys. Well, in the 19th and 20th centuries, was distinct from the Texas and California traditions. Californian cowboys did not use lassos or herd capture cattle. Their primary tools were bullwhips and dogs. While they still use dogs in Texas for parting, herding, and things like that, a lot of dogs were done in sheep herding and so on like that, and they didn't really go with the cattle as much. Or when they were running on these long treks, they would have cattle dogs with them and make hush puppies for them. That's what that's all about. Since Florida cow hunters didn't need a saddle horn for anchoring, that lariat was a lasso, or your rope. Many did not use Western saddles. Instead, they used a McClellan-type saddle. A McClellan-type saddle is like that earlier one that we looked at before, where it's a higher bottom and front onto it, but it doesn't have the hook on top, really. Well, some individuals wore boots that reached above the knees, to protection from snakes. Others wore brogans, and what are they going to show here? Well, that's an old. That's literally a shoe from the time. But a lot of brogans reached up a little farther than that. Brogans is commonly known like a combat boot. That's what really came out of something like this. They call them still brogans today. Usually they wore inexpensive wool or straw hats and used ponchos for protection from rain. Cattle and horses were introduced into Florida in the 16th century, and cattle reaching flourished. Spanish Florida reaching the 17th century. Cattle introduced by the Spanish persist today in breeds like the Florida Cracker cattle or Piney Woods cattle. They also have Florida Cracker horse, which is still used by some cowboys. You have a look. Well, it's the same picture. Um, Ranches owned by Spanish officials and missionaries operated in northern Florida to supply Spanish garrisons in St. Augustine. Yeah, the grass you know about everybody has on their lawn, other than Bermuda. And markets in Cuba. Raids in Spanish Florida and the province of Carolina and its Native American allies, which wiped out the native population of Florida, led to the collapse of the Spanish mission and ranching systems. I don't want to go into that. Just let that go. In the 18th century, Greek, Seminole, and other Indian people moved into the depopulated areas of Florida and started herding the cattle left from Spanish ranches. In the 19th century, most tribes in the area were dispossessed of their land and cattle and pushed south or west by settlers and the United States government. In the middle of the 19th century, white ranchers were running large herds of cattle on the extensive open range in central and south Florida, and hides and meat from Florida cattle came as critical supply item for the Confederacy during the American Civil War. Oh no, are they bad then? Well, the South was being fed from cows that are, it's, but somebody wants to throw that in there, huh? That a unit of cow cavalry was organized to round up and protect herds from Union raiders of cattle, so they couldn't get at it. After the Civil War into the 20th century, Florida were periodically driven to ports on the Gulf of Mexico, such as Punta Rasa near Fort Myers, Florida, and shipped to markets in Cuba. Here's where they talk about it in Hawaii, and really, if you want to go into depth of it, of this point, then you can read it for yourself. And we're just at Wiki looking at cowboys. But they have that, Montauk, New York, and of course we talked about Canada and their heritage they have with it, Calgary and so on, all in Alberta. Outside of North America, a lot of places. But what they don't really go into, the fact of, even though they talk about in Hungary and places like that, is where it actually came from and its origin. They talk about modern cowboys in certain areas now, but they're really going into where it comes from and its origins. There's modern working of cowboys, and they have attire that people know, like bandanas, which everybody thinks of as the bandana, and you don't wear a mask. Of course, now we're in 2020 when I'm recording this, so it's weird to talk about stuff like that, but used for mopping up sweat and dust storms, all kinds of things. Nowadays, it's more common to see a neckerchief where instead of being on your face, of course, it's pulled down on your neck. Chaps, usually pronounced shaps, or shinks, protect the rider's leg while on horseback, especially on riding through rough terrain and mesquite trees and all these things with livestock. Your cowboy boots, and that really is a protection type of thing, but it's a good work boot. And a lot of work boots now are based on things that are based around the brogans and the cowboy type of shoes. Cowboy hat, high-crowned hat with wide brim, protected from the sun, overhanging brush, and the elements. There's many styles, and initially influenced a modern-day style that we see by John B. Stetson's famous Boss of the Plains. But there's a lot of different cowboy hats. In fact, some iconic cowboys have slightly different looking hats from each other, and they're almost as distinct as Indiana Jones' hat is. Gloves, usually made from deer skin or other leather that's soft and flexible for working purposes. You wouldn't use cattle leather for that. It provides protection when handling barbed wire and other things like that. Well, we used to use mule skin, and they're subtle enough to be able to move and do everything real good, but they're real dirty, real hardy, and don't mind getting dirty. Quite a few times I would have cut my hand open bad if I wasn't wearing those, but boom, boom, hey, nothing happened. Isn't that amazing? But I guess one of the more important things that they brought as a commonality is jeans. Our other sturdy, close-fitting trousers made of canvas, which quite often was made of hemp, or denim, designed to protect the legs to prevent the trouser legs from snagging on brush, equipment, or other hazards. Properly made cowboy jeans have a smooth inside seam to prevent blistering of the inner thigh while riding long-term on horseback. But a modern thing of jeans. They mention it there, but of course you'd have to look up jeans in their own right and find that pants, rather than wearing kilts and wearing things that were pretty much like kilts also from the Greeks and Romans, and even the Egyptians and so on, the actual pants that so many cultures wear today were from Proto-Indo-Europeans, and it seems like they want to give it because, well, a skirt doesn't work out in that. And you want to split the skirt, but then if you sew that part up together, then your legs are still all covered, and here we go. That's your modern pants. Oh, those same people are the ones that had the horses. They also seem to have domesticated the dogs and the cattle. And there's a lot more that goes along with those people and what they had done for the world. So you can talk about tools and firearms that they had, and they had specialty knives such as pocket knives, specifically folding cattle knives or stock knives, which we might call jack knives. And there's that jack again, by the way. The knife has multiple blades on it sometimes, usually including a leather punch and a sheep's foot blade. And a sheep's foot blade is something that's, well, here, let's see what they'll tell you. Well, it's a blade, a portional tool. It's made to chop or slice. It's what a lot of people would call a squirrel blade or something like that, or a skinning knife where it has a blade. And if you'll go to sheep's foot blade, they talk about how, ancient obsidian and things. It goes back to caveman time, scraping hides in situations. Yeah, it's the same type of thing, so that's a carry-on too. Lariat, which is the Spanish la riata, meaning the rope, sometimes called a lasso. Everybody knows about that. It's simply a rope is tightly at one end of twisted, stiff rope, occasionally of rawhide or leather. That little tight thing that's held on the end that makes the loop, right? Yeah. It's called a hondo. And recently I did a video about how my dad was stationed in the Air Force, an Air Force man out here in southern Texas, so it's kind of going along with this, in a place called Hondo Air Force Base. Well, what's a hondo? It's the little clasper that makes the loop on a lasso. Yeah. When the rope is run through a hondo, it creates a loop and slides so easily, tightens quickly, and can be thrown to catch animals. Of course, there are spurs, which are pretty much looked bad upon nowadays, and situations where you don't really need that unless you just want to go ching, ching, ching. And they say other weapons, while associated with modern cowboys, came into existence after the invention of gunpowder, such as guns and so on. Cattle herders of earlier times were sometimes equipped with heavy pole arms, bows, or lances. That's the only little mention that it goes back to real ancient times and who could have been a cowboy. But again, the original cowboys were Proto-Indo-Europeans. Oh, they even had covered wagons. Yeah, the wagon wheels are exactly the same, pretty much. Yeah, isn't that strange? So, not to go off into horses too much, although that is the thing that I'm endeared with. There's a lot of different styles of horses, all the way from a giant Clydesdale that you see in those commercials in the Super Bowl kicking footballs and how big they are, the Budweiser Clydesdales, down to Shetland ponies and Welsh ponies, things like that. They also have different purposes, like a quarter horse runs real fast in a short period of time and does quick cuts, whereas a thoroughbred is made for long distance, more running. But really, when you find out, there was a faster horse at one time other than that. But when they went to thoroughbred, it's like basically the best of all things. But the North American quarter horse is a breed developed primarily in Texas from a combination of thoroughbreds, Mustangs, and other Iberian ancestry horses, influences from even Arabian horses. But such as the Morgan horse that we're familiar with now, that hopefully they'll show a good picture of it. Beautiful horses, red bay horse, right? And now extinct breeds such as the